personal analysis using the exact same economic drivers we talk about in the video. This will help you determine whether prices are going up or down in your neighborhood. Let's dive right in. Number one, population change and demographics. I've got a list, and the cities on my left in the green, these are cities that have seen a rapid increase in population as of the last few years. The cities on my right have seen a massive decrease in population. And you ask yourself, why would someone move out of a Detroit or out of a Chicago? Maybe that's a rhetorical question. But why would someone move to Seattle, Denver, Dallas? Generally, as of late, it's taxes and just bad government policy. The reason this can move prices up is pretty simple. You've got this many people moving into an area, and you've got this much housing. Over the course of years, the housing actually will catch up to the amount of people that are moving in, but that takes a while. It takes a long time to buy the land, to get it rezoned, to get it permitted, actually build the homes, and then sell them. So there's always this lag, which is why you've seen dramatic price appreciation in cities like Seattle, Denver, and Dallas. The flip side of that coin is when you have an outflow of population. Then you've got this much housing and this many people. And when you're left with a housing glut, like you have especially in Detroit, I don't know if you've ever been to Detroit, but once you get outside of the city and you see all those vacant homes, that's because you had a massive outflow of population. That hasn't yet happened in Chicago and New York, but if they keep going the same direction, especially with their pension fund problems, their high taxes, and the craziness that they've got going on with the government policies, you could see something like that happen in these cities as well. Next, we've got demographic shifts. As an example, let's use the baby boomers and the millennials. For the baby boomers right now, they're coming to that retirement age where they're spending a lot less money, they're not moving around so much. So on a macro level, that does put downward pressure on housing just because there's not as much spending. But this also translates to the population shift, and a lot of these boomers are retiring, so they're going into those states where a lot of people retire, such as Florida and Texas. What you have to understand, there are a lot of cross currents that we're going to be talking about through this entire video. And the population change is one of those cross currents. Demographics is just another cross current. It doesn't mean that that in and of itself is going to move the market, and the baby boomers are a perfect example of that because there's two different cross currents there. You've got one that's putting downward pressure on the housing market in the sense that they're spending less, and then you've got other cross currents with the baby boomers. They're putting that upward pressure on housing prices in states where a lot of people go to retire. Number two is capital flows. Now, what does this mean exactly? It's really just the movement of money. As an example of this, I'm going to use my very accurate hand-drawn model of the world. As you can tell, obviously, this is China, Japan, the United States, Canada, South America. And now let me just state that it doesn't necessarily have to mean that money's moving in from different countries. It can move from state to state or from asset class to asset class. But in this case, we're just using the example of money moving from China and coming up from South America. So why would this happen? Well, a lot of people in other countries see real estate in the United States as a safe haven. So if they see problems in their own country, such as capital controls coming in on the horizon, they're going to want to get that money out of there as fast as they can. So the Chinese are going to put money into Vancouver, San Francisco, maybe Seattle, and especially down here to Los Angeles, because those are the cities that they know well. Conversely, most of the people in South America, they know Miami. It's mostly Spanish speaking, so when you have capital flight, when people get worried in South America or they need to diversify their net worth, they're going to put a lot of equity in Miami. Oh, and then people from Europe, of course, coming in, they're going to go into New York. That's why the main hot spots for FDI, foreign direct investment in real estate, is Los Angeles, Miami, New York. A few things that I'd like to point out. Why are they going into these cities? Is it because they're just amazing investments? Not really. It's because, in my opinion, they have the best brand. So think about this. If you're someone in China, or if you're someone that lives in Argentina, and maybe you've never even been to the United States, where are you going to put money? Well, you don't know anything about Wichita, Kansas. You don't know anything about Louisiana. The only thing that you've seen on TV or the movies is San Francisco or Los Angeles. Or if you're someone here in South America, probably the only place that you've been in the United States is quite possibly Miami or maybe New York. Those are the places you know. And it's just like if we had issues in the United States and we were thinking about selling some of our assets and moving those assets, let's say, to China. Well, maybe this will happen in the future. Where would you put money in China? Well, the very first place would probably be Hong Kong or Beijing or Shanghai. Why? Because those are the cities that you know. Therefore, there's a level of comfort to them. And usually when this happens, you've got quite a herd mentality. So all the people in China like to invest in the same spot. All the people in South America, they like to invest in the same spot. Generally, when this happens, not all the time, but generally throughout history when this happens, it signals a very frothy market. Because typically these investors are not the smart money. They're not the sophisticated ones. So they're going in following everyone else, and usually that means that they're not making a great investment. The best example I can use is, of course, Japan in the late 80s. Now, you guys might not remember this. If you're as old as I am, you definitely do. Japan in the late 80s was literally buying the entire state of California. They bought Pebble Beach. They bought absolutely everything because prices were getting so high here in Japan. In fact, at one point in time, Japan had the highest, by far the highest real estate values of any country in the world. I remember reading something to the effect online that just one city block in Tokyo at one time had a greater value than like the entire country of Australia as far as all their real estate combined. It was absolutely amazing. And it was in a huge bubble. But these Japanese investors wanted to get money out of there because everything was so pricey in Japan. So they just started buying up everything in California and throughout the United States because relative to Japan, it was extremely cheap. But what did that signify? That signified a massive, massive bubble in Japan and, at the time, U.S. real estate. Number 3, supply/building costs. And I put this together for a reason, because those building costs really translate to the amount of supply that is in the market. If our costs are greater than the price that we can sell on a per square foot basis, and now when I say price, I should say return on investment, because this has to do with rental properties as well. You can't build rental properties if you don't get enough of a return relative to the cost that you have out of pocket. The costs really come in 3 main areas. Number 1, materials. Number 2, labor. And number 3, this is a big one, government restrictions, mostly in the form of permits. And where you really see this is in the building codes, especially in Southern California, where they only let you build single-family homes as opposed to allowing multifamily so they could go up. This would drastically reduce the cost of housing and make LA a lot more like Houston. But that's for another video. Really, it's simple math, and we'll put up a graph of current building costs. If the price a builder can sell a specific property is $200 a square foot, and it costs them $200 plus to build, you're going to get no more supply of this type of home on the market until prices increase. Just as a quick side note, that's why I always suggest buying starter homes in the Midwest, because you can still get those starter homes for under the cost of construction. And that really limits your downside. We talked about an undersupply, but there can be an oversupply as well. From what I've seen, this is a lot less frequent, but when it does happen, it can create really, really big problems. Generally, when you get an oversupply, it's a malinvestment, and that is caused by artificially low interest rates. The media and the general public, they like to put the blame on all different groups. But generally, if you do the homework and if you peel off the layers of the onion, that core will always lead back to the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates artificially low. That is what creates the malinvestment. The artificially low interest rates aren't a prerequisite for the euphoria, but it definitely helps. A common mistake that people make all the time is they think that this malinvestment is somehow created by greed, which is completely ridiculous because throughout human history, we've always been humans. And the amount of greed is no greater or less now or in 2006 than it was in the tulip bulb bubble in the 1600s. It's just that greed can do a lot more damage when interest rates are at 0% than if interest rates are at 10%. And some of the markets that we saw big oversupply in the last bubble, of course, was Las Vegas, Phoenix, Miami. It was that euphoria where all the builders and the general public and the media just thought that prices would never go down and they were just going to the moon, and the population of all these places would just increase exponentially. I want to state one thing here for the record. This oversupply is a big difference between now and 2006. In 2006, there was a huge oversupply, and now there's a dramatic undersupply. That doesn't mean that I think that the housing market is fairly priced now. It just means that the prices are extremely high, just as high as they were in 2006, but we don't have the same type of supply issue. And I don't think that matters because if you watch my other videos, you know that the next big downturn in prices, in my opinion, is going to come as a result of the recession pricking the housing bubble instead of that housing bubble creating the recession. Number 4, real wages. And that is people's income adjusted for inflation. Remember that's very important. Basically what you have are home prices equal the monthly payment affordability. So if people's wages, the real wages, go up, that means that they're going to be able to afford a higher monthly payment. If they can afford a higher monthly payment, then that, of course, is going to drive prices up. If real wages stay the same, then, of course, prices should pretty much stay the same. And if real wages go down, then prices will most likely go down as well because there'll be less purchasing power and less demand. So you're going to have a linear relationship between real wages and prices, assuming market rates stay consistent. And that is a big if. Number 5, rates and credit. Remember in the last scene, we had prices and real wages, and those stayed pretty much consistent as long as the interest rate and the amount of credit in the system stays consistent as well. See, if we have a price for a house at $100,000, and let's say the payment from that homeowner is $700, and that is at a 7% interest rate. If interest rates go down to maybe 5%, that's going to lower this monthly payment to, let's say, roughly $600. If this person's wages stay the same, they can still afford $700, which means their purchasing power for a house goes up to $120,000. Of course, these are rough numbers, but you get the idea. As interest rates go down, people's purchasing power goes up with the same amount of wages, putting upward pressure on home prices because now there's more demand. And let's not forget about lending standards. As lending standards decrease, the amount of credit in the system increases as well. The more credit we have in the system, even if the borrowers aren't very good, the more demand, the higher the prices until supply can catch up. And remember that supply generally lags behind the demand. So as credit increases, regardless of whether it's a result of lending standards or rates going down, and remember the Fed is pushing rates down artificially, you can see a disconnect between prices and real wages, where prices keep going up, 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 although the real wages stay the same. And this delta right here that we have is totally created by artificially low interest rates in excessive credit. In my opinion, this is very unhealthy. The example that we had in the last scene where both of these lines were going up and that delta stayed the same because real wages were going up as well, that is a healthy increase in prices. Okay, it's that time that you've all been waiting for, the bonus, where I give you my personal analysis as to whether or not prices in the United States will have the tendency of going up or down in the future. Before I get into this, I want to make sure it's very clear that you never, ever, ever use this to make investment decisions. You always invest based on whether or not an asset is cheap or if it's expensive. You never, ever, ever invest on whether you think prices are going up or going down. And if you need any clarification on that, make sure that you subscribe to the channel right now, because we'll have a lot of content coming out about my framework for investing in the future, and we've got a couple of videos up right now that address it. But let's go right back to this. First of all, we've got the population change. This, I'm going to take a pass. It's really market by market. Like we said in the first example, you've got markets like Seattle, Denver, all of Texas, Miami, and a lot of Florida, where you're seeing a migration to those cities and states from other cities and states, more specifically in the Northeast, where like Connecticut, New York, and then of course we all know Detroit. So on this, as far as population change, I'm not going to give it a plus or a minus. I'm really going to say that it's market dependent. Moving on to capital flows. As you remember, we talked about foreign direct investments specifically. And that's all this money coming in from China or South America. If I had to give you my best prediction, I would say that foreign direct investment in the future is going to decline. But I would only give that about a 55% probability. Why is that? Because there's big problems in the entire world economy right now with the amount of debt, negative yielding interest rates. I could go on and on. And for the last few decades, the entire world has seen the United States as the cleanest shirt in the dirty hamper. So if the worldwide economy goes through a recession, you could see increased capital flight coming into the United States and buying up that real estate. But if the United States goes into a deeper recession than the rest of the world, then all bets are off. So I'm going to give it 55%. I don't have a high conviction on that. Moving on to supply costs. And I've got these categorized by this green bar, signifying that they're more macro issues. This is at the local level, and this is more 30,000 foot. So supply costs for the overall market, I think, are going to stay about the same, if not increase. We've had a lot of price inflation with materials and labor. I see that continuing to increase. On the flip side of that, going back to some of the local markets, the cure for high prices are high prices. So looking at markets like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, where they don't have a lot of room to expand, I think the only option that they're going to have to lower housing costs is to create extra supply through a relaxation of the building codes. I think that single-family building codes in a lot of these markets will be ancient history within the next 10 years. If that's the case, you'll see the supply costs in those markets go down dramatically because you're not going to have that government intervention preventing the free market from working. So over here, whether that's a plus or a minus for prices, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do another cop out here. And I'm going to say market dependent. Next up, we've got real wages. I see this putting downward pressure, put it in this category. And the reason why is because demographics. Right now, we are pretty much full employment in the United States. And if you study economics, you see when we're at full employment, that's the time when there should be more upward pressure on wages than any other time. We're seeing a little bit of upward pressure on wages, but not much. I think that the majority of the wages going up are going to be a result in the future of inflation. And we've got this glut of baby boomers retiring right now, and their savings are dwindling because the Federal Reserve has kept interest rates so low, they're not getting a return on their savings. I'll put a card right up here for the pension crisis. So since they have less purchasing power, I think you're going to see more baby boomers that are currently retired coming back into the labor market. That's going to increase labor force participation, and that's most likely going to increase the unemployment rate. This also is going to create a lot of competition for those jobs with millennials. And if there's more competition for those millennials that are straddled with student loans, that's going to decrease their purchasing power as well. So I could really go off on a tangent there, but let's just leave it at this. With the real wages department, I'm going to put that on the price decline side. Last but not least, we come to rates and credit. This is a no-brainer. A huge check mark, and the price is down. We have had ZIRP, which is zero interest rate policy, for over 10 years in the United States. That has pulled so much demand forward from the future. Going back to that wedge that we were talking about, prices have had a huge disconnect from real wages. And that's a result of an expansion of credit due to interest rates and lending standards. So many people think that lending standards now are tighter than they were in 2006, which they are, but if you look at the overall mortgage debt in the system, we've got just as much mortgage debt now, if not a little bit more, than we had in 2006. So the prices going up, we can safely say, has been a result exclusively of artificially low interest rates and a credit expansion. So when that credit expansion goes back the other way, goes back down, that is going to put all this downward pressure on housing prices. And this cycle is so powerful that I think it's going to override everything else that we've talked about. Next, what I want you to do is I want you to check out this video we'll put right in the upper right-hand corner. It's Housing Bubble 2.0. You're going to absolutely love it, and we'll see you on the next video.